You really think this little hobby will amount to anything? Dad's voice cut through the warm kitchen like an unexpected slap. It was a Saturday morning, the kind I used to love. Sunlight was pouring across the table, lighting up the neat rows of my homemade product samples, candles I'd spent months perfecting. I'd driven all night to bring them home and show him. He didn't even look at me. He just flipped the newspaper page, smirking like I was some kid pretending to play business. My heart thudded in my chest. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no words came. For a moment, all I could hear was the clock ticking behind him and the blood rushing in my ears. I closed the box and straightened my back. Fine, I thought. I'll show you what this hobby can do. My name is Jason Miller, and for as long as I can remember, I've had two dreams: to build something of my own and to finally make my father see me as more than a burden. I grew up in a modest two-story house in Dayton, Ohio. Dad, Robert Miller, was a respected accountant, known for his clean suits and sharper tongue. Mom had left when I was 12. She used to say Dad's pride was like an iron gate. Once it closed on you, it didn't matter how hard you knocked. I was 15 when I started making candles. At first, it was just a way to distract myself from the hollow spaces Mom left behind. I'd melt wax on the kitchen stove, add cheap scents from the craft store, and pour them into old mason jars. The first batch was terrible, lumpy, and uneven, but when I lit one in my room, the lavender filled the air, and for a second, I didn't feel so empty. By high school, I was spending weekends selling candles at the flea market. My dad would drive by sometimes, just to shake his head. "You're wasting your time," he'd say when I got home. "If you put half that energy into your grades, maybe you'd get somewhere." I tried to explain that it wasn't just about money. It was about creating something that felt like mine. Something no one could take away. But he'd already be walking out of the room before I could finish. I think that's why, when he laughed at my samples that morning, something in me finally snapped. I was 28 by then. I'd spent years working dead-end jobs to fund my small batches: grocery clerk, warehouse loader, then a shipping assistant at a soap company. I'd come home every night and work on new blends, new labels, new wicks. I ruined dozens of shirts with dye and fragrance oil, but every failure taught me something. There was a time early on when I almost gave up. One winter, I'd invested every dollar I had into a holiday market booth. Sure, I'd sell enough to cover January's rent. But the first day, a blizzard shut the city down, and I sat alone in a drafty tent, watching snow bury the sidewalk. When I got home that night, frostbitten and humiliated, Dad was waiting in the kitchen. "I told you," he said quietly. "Real men don't waste their lives chasing hobbies." I went upstairs without replying, and I cried into my pillow like I was 15 again. But I didn't stop. A few weeks later, I got a call from a woman named Lisa Warren, who ran a boutique downtown. She'd seen my candles at a church fundraiser. She loved the scents, the labels. She asked if I could make 100 for her store. I didn't have the supplies or the credit to buy them, so I borrowed $300 from my best friend, Marcus. Marcus and I had been close since middle school, when we bonded over being the kids nobody picked first. He believed in me when no one else did. Lisa's order sold out in 2 weeks. Then she placed a bigger one. Word spread. Soon I was getting emails from other shops across the state. But even then, Dad refused to acknowledge any of it. "You need a real job," he'd grumble every time he saw me carrying boxes of wax or jars. "You think candles are going to pay the bills?" The truth was, they were paying my bills. Maybe not all of them yet, but enough to matter. By 26, I'd saved enough to rent a tiny workspace, an old garage with cracked windows and a squeaky door. I spent my evenings there, mixing scents under a single dangling bulb. I painted the walls white and built wooden shelves for supplies. Every night, I'd lock up and stand outside, just looking at the sign I'd made: Miller and Flame Artisan Candles. No one knew how much that little sign meant to me. It was proof that I was more than Dad's disappointment. One night, I was packing an order when Marcus dropped by with pizza. We sat on the floor, eating out of the box, and he asked, "Why do you care so much what your dad thinks?" I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I was too ashamed to say it out loud. Because he was my father. because no matter how old I got, a part of me still wanted him to be proud. I thought of Mom sometimes, how she used to kneel next to me while I poured wax, telling me my hands were meant to create things. She called me her little alchemist. When she left, Dad threw out most of her things, but I'd saved one of her scarves, a blue cotton wrap that still smelled faintly of her perfume. On the nights when the doubt got too loud, I'd take it out and hold it, reminding myself that at least one person had believed in me. And when I finally decided to quit my warehouse job and go full-time with the business, it felt like jumping off a cliff. I gave my notice, emptied my savings, and signed a lease on a bigger workshop. My father didn't even bother to come see it. He just raised an eyebrow when I told him and said, "Well, don't expect me to bail you out when this fails." The first 6 months were brutal. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes longer. My hands were always raw from handling wax. My back ached from lifting crates. There were nights when I'd sit on the concrete floor, staring at the bills piled on my desk, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But then, slowly, things started to change. I signed contracts with 3 more boutiques. A local blogger wrote an article about my candles, calling them the warmest scents in the Midwest. Orders trickled in from places I'd never even visited: Colorado, New York, Texas. And then the big break came. A regional home goods chain reached out. They wanted to carry Miller and Flame in 20 stores. The deal would triple my production overnight. I should have been overjoyed. But all I could think about was how Dad would react. Part of me still hoped he'd say he was proud. Instead, when I told him, he laughed. Not a short chuckle, a full, shaking laugh that made my face burn. "That's cute," he said, wiping his eyes. "Let me know when you're done playing businessman." I didn't reply. I just picked up my samples, walked out to my car, and sat behind the wheel with my hands shaking. That was the last time I tried to make him see me. After that, I poured every ounce of myself into the company. I hired my first part-time employee, a single mom named Carla, who had a talent for packaging and a heart big enough to fill the workshop. I expanded the scent line, developed new packaging, and invested in better supplies. By 28, Miller and Flame was profitable. Really profitable. I still remember the day I realized I was making more money than my father had in his best year as an accountant. I was sitting in the workshop late one evening, going over the numbers, and for the first time, I let myself feel the pride I'd been denying. I did this without his approval, without his help. But that didn't mean I was finished. I knew that someday he'd need me. Maybe he'd never admit it, but I'd be ready. I folded Mom's blue scarf and tucked it into my desk drawer. It felt like a quiet promise to her and to myself that I'd never let his doubt define me again. And the day he called me, voice small and uncertain, I realized the tables had finally turned. It started with a voicemail. I was pouring a fresh batch of amber vanilla candles when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I wiped my hands on a rag and glanced at the screen. Robert Miller, one new voicemail. I stared at it for a moment. My father never left voicemails. If he couldn't say it to your face, he just didn't say it at all. I let it sit for a while. There was something almost poetic about it, him calling me for once. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I played it. "Jason, it's me." He paused, clearing his throat. "Listen, I was wondering if we could talk sometime soon. Nothing urgent. Just call me back." It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to let me know something had shifted. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I took my time. That weekend, I met with the head buyer of the regional home goods chain that had picked up Miller and Flame. We finalized a deal for nationwide distribution. The contract was in my name. The factory lease was in my name. Every shipment, every cent note, from cashmere fig to rosemary cedar, was mine. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. When I finally called him back 2 days later, he answered on the first ring. "Jason," he said a little too eagerly. "Thanks for calling." His voice sounded tired, worn out in a way I didn't remember hearing before. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone even. He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, well, not exactly. I was wondering if you had time to grab lunch this week. There's something I'd like to talk to you about." Lunch turned out to be at a diner just off Main Street. It was a quiet spot we used to go to when I was a kid. Back then, he'd sit in the booth, reading his paper while I stirred sugar into my hot chocolate, trying to get his attention with stories about school. When I walked in, he was already seated, hands folded, eyes scanning the menu without reading it. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked up and smiled, a faint, uncertain curve of his lips. "Thanks for coming," he said. I nodded. "You sounded different." He cleared his throat again, a habit he always had when he was about to say something uncomfortable. "Well, I wanted to talk to you about the house." My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "I'm behind on the mortgage," he said flatly, not meeting my eyes. 3 months. They're threatening foreclosure. I sat back. That wasn't what I expected. He continued, still not looking at me. "I tried picking up some part-time consulting, but things are different now. Clients have moved on. Expenses are piling up." I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch. Then he looked at me for the first time. "I thought maybe you could help me, just until I figure things out." It would have been easy to explode. Easy to throw his words back at him about real men and worthless hobbies. But instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. I placed it on the table between us. He looked at it confused. "What's this?" he asked. I leaned forward, calm and steady. "This is the current balance sheet for Miller and Flame. These are last quarter's profits. That's a copy of the loan agreement I signed with First State Bank to purchase the lot on Jefferson Avenue. And this," I pulled out a separate page, "is a wire confirmation. You might recognize the account number. That's your mortgage, Dad. Paid in full. Yesterday." He stared at the papers like they were written in another language. What? "I've been paying your mortgage since December," I said quietly. "The bank contacted me directly. You listed me as your emergency contact, remember? They figured I might want to know before things went to auction." He sank back in his seat, his mouth opening and closing. "I didn't ask for that," he said finally. "No," I agreed. "You didn't. Just like I never asked you to believe in me. But I still hoped you would." He went silent again, eyes fixed on the table. I waited. Then he said something I never expected. "I didn't think it would work," he whispered. "Your business. I didn't want you to fail, Jason. I was scared. You're my only kid. And I couldn't see it. I couldn't see how you'd make it." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who once towered over my childhood like an iron statue now seemed smaller. Softer. Tired. "Yeah," I said quietly. "But I could." I slid the folder back into my bag and stood up. "I'm not here to punish you, Dad. I've spent enough years chasing your approval. I just wanted you to know, this little hobby, it's not so little anymore." I paused before walking away. "I paid off the house. You don't owe me anything. But maybe now you'll understand what it means to believe in something before the world tells you it's worth believing in." That night, I sat in my workshop with a fresh cup of tea and my mother's scarf around my neck. I thought about how hard I had fought to be seen, not by the world, but by the man who raised me. And now, I didn't need him to see me anymore, because I saw myself clearly. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Dad. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I drove to the workshop early, unlocked the door, and turned on the lights. The familiar scent of lavender and sandalwood settled around me like armor. For years, I had dreamed about this moment, when he would finally have no choice but to see me. But the truth was, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt complicated. I was labeling a fresh batch of jars when my phone buzzed again. This time, I picked up. "Jason," he said without preamble. "Can you come by the house? We need to talk." "I'm working." "I know," he replied, voice tight. "But I'd appreciate it." For a moment, I considered refusing. I'd done my part. I'd paid his debts. I'd proved myself. I didn't owe him more conversation. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, tugged at me. "I'll be there in an hour." When I pulled up to the house, he was waiting on the porch. He looked older in the daylight, his hair fully gray now, lines carved deep around his mouth. He watched me get out of the car without saying a word. Inside, the living room was exactly as I remembered. Stale air, the old recliner he refused to replace, a stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. The only new thing was a framed photo of me at last year's artisan fair, smiling beside my display booth. For a second, my chest tightened. "I didn't know you had that picture," I said quietly. He didn't answer, just gestured for me to sit. I stayed standing. "Look," he began, rubbing a hand over his face. "I need you to understand something." "I understand plenty," I said, my voice calm. "You thought I'd fail. You told me to my face that I was wasting my life." His jaw flexed. "I said what I thought would protect you." "No," I corrected. "You said what would protect you. You didn't want to be embarrassed by my risk." He looked away, and for the first time, I saw shame there. "I've been thinking a lot," he admitted. "About your mother. About how she used to tell me I was too hard on you." "She was right," I said. He nodded slowly, as if the admission hurt. "Maybe she was." I crossed my arms. "So what is this, Dad? An apology? Or another lecture?" "It's neither," he said, voice growing sharp. "It's reality. I'm in trouble. You paid off the mortgage, but there's more. Credit cards, back taxes, medical bills." A bitter laugh rose in my throat. "So, you need me to bail you out again?" His mouth twisted. "I wouldn't call it bailing me out. I'd call it doing your duty as my son." I stared at him, incredulous. "My duty?" He gestured around the room. "This is the house you grew up in. You'd be nothing without what I provided." "And I've repaid that 1,000 times over," I said evenly. "In fact, I'm the reason you still have a roof over your head." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "You want help? Fine. But we're going to be clear about what this is. You don't get to insult me, then demand support like it's your right." His eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "No," I said, my voice steady. "For once, you're going to watch yours." He looked stunned, like it had never occurred to him that I could stand my ground. And in that silence, the years of resentment flooded out of me. "All those nights you mocked me," I said, my voice low, "I still hoped you'd change. I kept believing that one day you'd see me for who I was. But you can't. You're too proud." "I'm your father," he spat. "And I'm the man paying your bills," I shot back. "You can call that disrespect if you want, but I call it reality." For a moment, I thought he might tell me to get out. But instead, he deflated, shoulders sinking, eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know how to be any different," he said hoarsely. "I know," I replied, my anger softening. "But I'm not going to let your shame become my burden anymore." He looked up at me, something like desperation flickering across his face. "What do you want from me, Jason?" he asked. I exhaled, feeling something inside me settle. "I don't want anything," I said. "Not anymore. But if you want my help, it comes with boundaries." His mouth tightened. "What kind of boundaries?" I pulled a piece of paper from my jacket pocket and handed it to him. It was a printed agreement I'd drafted the night before. "If I'm going to pay off the rest of your debts, we're going to set this up properly. I'll make monthly payments directly to your creditors. You won't ask me for cash. You won't guilt me for making my own decisions. And you will treat me and my business with respect." He scanned the page, eyes flicking back up to mine. "You want me to sign this?" he demanded. "I do," I said simply. "That's humiliating." "It's honest," I countered. "And it's the only way this goes forward." His hands trembled as he set the paper down. For a moment, I thought he'd tear it up. Then slowly he picked up the pen. As he signed, a thought flashed through my mind. This is it. The moment I take back every piece of power I'd handed over, year by year, insult by insult. He set the pen down and didn't look up. I folded the agreement and slipped it into my pocket. "We're done here," I said quietly. But as I turned to leave, a voice called out from the doorway. "I think you're being cruel." I turned. My father's younger brother, my Uncle Tom, stood there. I hadn't seen him arrive. "Uncle Tom," I greeted stiffly. You'd let your own father drown in debt over pride? He demanded. I held his gaze. I'm the only reason he still has this house. That doesn't give you the right to humiliate him. I felt my hands curl into fists. I'm not humiliating him. I'm protecting myself. For once. Uncle Tom looked at Dad. Robert, tell him he's out of line. But my father didn't answer. He just stared at his hands. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You want to call it cruelty, fine, I said. But I spent my entire life shrinking to make him comfortable. Not anymore. Uncle Tom shook his head in disgust, but I ignored him. Because in that moment, I felt something I'd never felt in this house before. Freedom. I'll send the first payment next week, I said, turning back to Dad. And I'll keep doing it as long as you keep your word. I didn't wait for a reply. When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face, and I breathed deep. The air felt cleaner, lighter. My phone buzzed as I walked to the car. A text from Marcus. How'd it go? I smiled faintly as I typed back. I think I finally grew up. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Less like a monument to my failure and more like just another old building. And for the first time, I realized I didn't hate my father. I didn't even pity him. I just didn't need him anymore. It was a strange, bittersweet relief. I didn't go back to Dad's house for almost 3 weeks. During that time, life at the workshop kept moving forward. Orders were steady, sometimes overwhelming, and every morning, Carla and I would share coffee while we mapped out production schedules. The routine grounded me in ways I never expected. But even as my days filled with shipments and supply invoices, there was a quieter transformation happening. Late at night, I'd find myself thinking about everything that had happened, about the way Dad's voice had cracked when he signed the agreement, about the look on Uncle Tom's face, about the shame that hung between us like a bad smell. One evening, after I locked up, I drove to the little park near my childhood home. I sat on a bench overlooking the pond, the same one Mom used to take me to on Sundays. The water was still, reflecting the last traces of sunset. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool air. I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt sad. Sad that it had taken so many years, so many battles, for us to finally see each other clearly. And even sadder that maybe it was too late to build something better. But as the days passed, something shifted in me. One morning, I walked into the workshop to find Carla already there, arranging finished candles into neat rows. She looked up with a smile. Early start, I asked. She nodded. I wanted to talk to you. I set my keys down, curious. She hesitated, then said, I'm thinking about starting my own line of bath products. Soaps, scrubs, stuff to go with the candles. I wanted your advice. For a second, I was transported back to the beginning, when I was the one asking for help, the one trying to prove I belonged in the world of business. And now, here I was, the person someone else trusted to guide them. I smiled. Carla, that's a fantastic idea. Her shoulders relaxed. You really think so? I do. And if you want, I can help you set up the supplier accounts and figure out pricing. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Jason. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. It wasn't just about proving myself to my father anymore. It was about using everything I'd learned to lift other people up. That afternoon, I called Marcus. You busy tonight? I asked. Not really. What's up? I'm thinking about stopping by Dad's. Wanna come? There was a pause on the line. You sure you're ready for that? I took a breath.
Yeah.
I am. We drove over together just after sunset. As we pulled up, I noticed the porch light was on. A small sign that maybe he was expecting me. Dad answered the door, wearing the same old cardigan he'd owned for 20 years. His eyes flicked between me and Marcus. Hi, I said simply. Hi. He stepped back to let us in. We sat in the living room, the three of us. Marcus stayed quiet, sensing this was something I needed to do myself. I came to talk, I began. Not about money. About everything else. Dad swallowed hard. All right. I met his gaze. You hurt me. I know. His voice was rough. All my life, I wanted you to see me,
To believe in me.
and when you didn't, I thought it meant I wasn't worth believing in. He looked down at his hands. I don't know how to fix that, he admitted. I don't either, I said honestly. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life angry. And I don't want you to spend the rest of yours alone. Silence stretched between us. Then he looked up, and I was startled to see tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. I nodded slowly. Thank you. It wasn't a miracle. It didn't erase the years of hurt. But it was something. A beginning. I stood. I have to get back. But maybe next week you can come see the workshop. His eyes widened. You'd want me to? I'd like you to, I said. It's a big part of my life. He nodded, voice hoarse. I'd like that too. As Marcus and I left, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally knew it didn't have to be perfect to be better. The next week, Dad showed up at the workshop. He walked slowly through the aisles of stacked boxes and shelves lined with candles. He picked up a jar of cashmere fig and turned it over in his hands. These smell incredible, he said quietly. Thanks. He paused. Your mother would be proud. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, I whispered. I think so too. Carla came over to say hello, and Dad looked genuinely surprised when she introduced herself as my production lead. You built all this, he said, more to himself than to me. I did. And for the first time, there was no bitterness in the way I said it. Just truth. As he left, he turned at the door. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, he said, but I'd like to try. I nodded. That's all I need. In the weeks that followed, our relationship remained fragile, like a vase glued back together, cracks still visible. But it was real. Honest. One afternoon, I found a small envelope in my mailbox at the workshop. Inside was a note, written in Dad's careful block letters. Thank you for never giving up on yourself. I'm trying to learn how to do the same. I read it 3 times, then tucked it into my desk drawer beside Mom's blue scarf. Because in the end, that was all I ever wanted, for both of us to be better than our worst moments. 3 months later, the workshop smelled like rosemary cedar and vanilla bean. The new batch had just come off the curing racks, each jar lined up in perfect rows like a small army of proof that I had built this, and that no one could ever take it away. Dad visited every Thursday now. He never stayed long, an hour, maybe 2, but he always walked through the shelves slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He asked questions about the different blends, about shipping logistics, about the way I design labels. And every time he left, he patted my shoulder like he still didn't know how to hug me. It was enough. Carla's bath products were displayed along the back wall, tucked under a simple sign, Evergreen Botanicals, in partnership with Miller and Flame. She had sold her first 100 units last month. The day she got the confirmation email, she cried in my office while I brewed us both coffee. You did this, she told me, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. No, I corrected gently. You did. But in truth, I understood what she meant. Because somewhere along the way, success had become less about proving myself and more about making space for others to believe they could succeed too. Marcus stopped by every Friday after work, dropping off takeout and teasing me about my executive schedule. You realize you've officially become the guy with the fancy title and no time for anyone, he joked one evening, balancing a carton of lo mein on the edge of my desk. I make time for you, I pointed out. Yeah, because I bring food. He wasn't wrong. That Friday, after he left, I stayed late to reorganize inventory. The building was quiet except for the low hum of the cooling fans. I was checking the last shelf when my phone buzzed. It was Dad. Can I stop by tomorrow? I'd like to see the new labels. I stared at the message for a long moment. Just a year ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now, they felt peaceful. No desperation. No hunger for validation. Just 2 people trying to be better. Sure, I typed back. I'll be here. The next morning, he showed up right on time, wearing a pressed shirt I hadn't seen in years. He looked around, taking in the new displays and the line of pre-orders stacked near the front counter. "You've been busy," he said. "Always," I replied with a small smile. He wandered over to the sample shelf and picked up a jar of my bestseller, Midnight Balsam. He turned it over in his hands, reading the label. "Your mother would have liked this one," he said after a while. I swallowed.
Yeah,
She would have. We stood in comfortable silence. "You know," he began slowly, "I spent a long time believing that if something didn't look respectable, if it wasn't an office job or a degree, it wasn't worth anything." He set the candle down carefully. "I was wrong," he said simply. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you," I said. It was a small moment, but it felt bigger than any award or headline. That weekend, Carla hosted a launch party for her bath line in the workshop. She strung fairy lights along the beams and set out trays of lemon bars and sparkling cider. The place was full of customers and neighbors, their voices blending into a warm, bright hum. Dad came, too. He stood quietly near the back, sipping cider and watching people line up to buy Carla's products. At one point, I caught him wiping his eyes. "You okay?" I asked, stepping up beside him. He nodded, clearing his throat. "Just proud."
of you.
Of all this. I didn't tease him. Didn't press. "Thanks for coming," I said. "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied. And I believed him. By late summer, the workshop was busier than ever. The regional chain had placed another massive order, and 2 more states picked up distribution. I hired 3 new employees, people who reminded me of myself at 25, hungry, uncertain, determined to prove the world wrong. Sometimes, I'd catch Carla mentoring the newer staff, showing them how to check the wicks or weigh the fragrance oil. Watching her, I realized something important. I had created more than a business. I'd created a place where people could grow. One evening, as I locked up, I noticed the last rays of sunset pouring through the windows, catching the rows of candles and making them glow like small, steady flames. I thought of Mom then, her laughter, her softness, her unwavering belief in the way I saw the world. I pulled her scarf from my office drawer and draped it over my shoulders. In that moment, I felt her with me, as if she were standing there in the warm hush, reminding me that even the smallest sparks could light something lasting. And I knew this was what healing looked like. Not perfection, not a storybook ending, but a quiet, everyday courage. The courage to forgive. The courage to build. The courage to keep showing up, even when you've been taught that your dreams were too small. A week later, I invited Dad over for dinner. He sat at my kitchen table, picking at his plate like he didn't know how to start the conversation. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about everything you've done, about what I didn't do." "You did what you knew," I said softly. He shook his head.
No.
"I could have tried harder. I could have listened." I didn't argue, but he went on. "I'd like to keep trying now, if you'll let me." I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. "I'd like that," I said. It was imperfect. It was late, but it was enough. A month later, we hosted an open house at the workshop. Neighbors wandered in, sampling candles and chatting about the new autumn scents. I watched Dad show a woman how to trim the wick for a clean burn. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave me a small nod. I nodded back. When the last guest left, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cool night air. The moon was high, the street quiet, and for the first time, I felt no weight on my shoulders. Just possibility. A few days later, I found a note on my workbench. Dad's handwriting again, blocky and precise. "I'm glad you didn't listen to me. You were right to believe in yourself." I folded the note carefully and tucked it beside Mom's scarf. This was my legacy, not just the business or the profits, but the slow, steady work of becoming someone I could be proud of. Someone who chose grace over vengeance. Someone who built a life bigger than any old wounds. And as I stood there, surrounded by the proof of everything I had created, I knew that the best revenge was never the money or the success. It was the peace that came from knowing I hadn't needed his permission after all. The next morning, I opened the workshop early. Sunlight poured across the floor, catching the polished jars and the bundles of fresh labels. I brewed a pot of coffee, set out my ledger, and began planning the next quarter's production. It felt like any other day, except it wasn't, because for the first time, it felt like my life belonged completely to me. And I knew, whatever came next, I was ready.